Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, November 26, 2025, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week with the Roundup, we take the questions that we ask here on Wednesday afternoon from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. And that newsletter is available in a couple of different formats. I'm dropping in the chat on the various sites the link to our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. And you can subscribe to not only the newsletter, the 2 different versions, either through email or via LinkedIn, whichever you choose. You have an option as you scroll down the page, but you can also subscribe to this podcast, the podcast version of this live chat that happens on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also YouTube, live on Wednesday afternoons, almost every Wednesday when I'm home or in a place abroad where I can do a live event. But the newsletter takes a look at the kind of questions of the day in our profession related to international education. It covers a wide range of topics. It's called SMIE News Fit to Share. And SMIE is the name of the consulting company I started back in 2014 when I left working for Education USA. The newsletter has a few different sections. The first section is social media news, and that covers now a wide range of topics from obviously how social media is used in international education, upcoming platforms that might be appropriate for international educators to know about. It covers upcoming webinars on various topics, new blogs that you might want to be paying attention to, or any AI talk about how those tools are being leveraged inside of international education circles, and certainly there's more and more information on those kinds of topics every week. So I've dropped the link to the most recent email version in the chat as well, so you can see the kinds of news stories that we do. We cover the news stories there. We do our own news story mining from various sources around the internet and compile those in the social media category. Also, we have a look at what we call big picture issues in the United States, Solutions Central, and then a global roundup. And the last one, a focus on global roundup and having a global perspective, is actually one of our questions we'll focus on a little bit later today. So please do whichever one you choose, whether it's the email version or the LinkedIn version, getting a notification of that. You can subscribe to either way you choose the different versions of the newsletter. Between the two of them, I'm very happy to announce we now have over 2,800 subscribers across the international education spectrum that are weekly getting our newsletter in their inbox or in their LinkedIn notifications. So thank you all for making this newsletter a part of your regular international edification. It's a labor of love. This is something I do for free as part of my consulting business, along with the live chats here on Wednesdays. We give you the hot takes on Monday on the various topics impacting our field of international education. And then here on Wednesday, we kind of go next level, go deeper, and talk about in-depth analysis of some of the content that we're seeing popping up in the news stories of that week. So what we do each week is look at themes that develop in the newsletter, and we say, okay, this is something that might be worth delving into a little bit more, or if we find some particularly high-level topics in news stories that are covered that need some explanation. I know I have a lot of folks that listen in live on these or watch on repeat or subscribe to the podcast on the roundups that kind of need kind of a bit of an education or an introduction to different topics if they're newer to the profession, and that's why all are welcome here, because we really do take time to see how these different topics impact what we do and how we can take what we can learn from these topics or these news stories and implement them into how we improve our operations on our college campuses or in our businesses around the world that are reaching out to international students, connecting them with institutions. So let's get right to the first question. Obviously, last week was International Education Week. On Monday of International Education Week, typically you find Open Doors data is released. And we'll talk about that. And that's the first question. What do Open Doors numbers really tell us? Now, for those that are newer to international ed or to your positions at your universities, you might not be familiar with the whole backstory. Open Doors is commissioned by the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and has been for well over 50 years. And IIE has been the responsible party that gathers the information. And they are asked to survey SEVIS institutions that enroll international students, and for their principal designated school official to complete a report each year that chronicles how many students that are enrolled at different levels from different countries and different academic programs, different visa statuses. This happens, these surveys typically go out in early spring. So what we see reported this past week in the 2025 Open Doors report is the data from the previous academic year, so 2024-25 academic year. We're obviously in 25-26 right now. So the data that we see reported in Open Doors is almost year-old data, and doesn't tell us exactly how the playing field is today. The closest equivalent to today's information that we got from last week's data release happens to do with what they call the 2025 Fall Snapshot Survey. Now, the Open Doors report typically gets completed by well over 1,500 institutions in the United States that are enrolling international students. The Fall Snapshot Survey is always a smaller subset of that. This year, 825 or 850 institutions, and we'll get the exact numbers here in a second, but 825 institutions participated. 828, more than 825 participated in the IIE's version of this. And those institutions represent 63% of all international students that were reported in the Open Doors for the previous year. So that means that 63% of all international students are enrolled in those 828 U.S. institutions. And again, the IIE Fall Snapshot Survey captures only the post-secondary institutions. That would be colleges and universities, bachelor's, associates, bachelor's, master's degree levels. Though the Open Doors report also includes intensive English programs in the data that they report. So that's the what is included in the snapshot. The overall numbers, and again, this is fall 25. It's not really fall 25. It's actually as of spring 25. U.S. colleges have reported a 1% overall decline in international students, including both enrolled and those on OPT. So this is different levels, different numbers. Undergraduates were up 2%. OPT was up 14%. Number of graduate and non-degree students declined 12 and 17% respectively. The real numbers that I think most international educators that are in the know are familiar with Open Doors really want to know, how did we really do this fall? Because that's really where we were hearing numbers from SEVIS, SEVIS by the numbers that is put out by DHS back in September, October, that were sharing that basically overall enrollments are flat. SEVIS by the numbers and DHS do not report out new arrivals in that data. So that's something that there's always discrepancies there, because they were reporting basically flat numbers, 1% or so up overall, or down overall, 0.8% down. So the fall snapshot survey that IIE released last week showed that new enrollments of international students at first time studying at their college or university fell by 17% compared to last year. Last year's fall snapshot survey. and that approximately 29% reported an increase in new international enrollments. Those are the 29% we really need to do a deep dive on, but we'll never know that, unfortunately. 14% indicated stable numbers, and 57% noted a decrease in their new international enrollments this fall. So almost 60% experienced a decrease this fall for new international student numbers. Certainly my campus at University of Akron, we were in that 57%. So what I think a lot of nearly 3/4, the other one of the other data points, nearly 3/4 of U.S. colleges offered, that's 72%, offered admitted international students deferrals till spring 2026, and more than half, 56%, provided deferrals till fall 26. So that deferrals are the order of the day, and depending on how dependent an individual college or university was on India as a primary market for their international students, my guess is, and certainly our experience reflects this, that the challenge right now in India is still visa appointment availability. They still haven't opened up new appointment slots. We know we now have a U.S. ambassador finally in post in New Delhi. Whether that will change the landscape, that would be part of the equation, because certainly on the ground as of September, October, there were not robust numbers of new appointments being made available, and we were told definitively that wasn't going to happen, and that students should be applying a year in advance for their visas. So, which we know how likely that is going to happen when most colleges and universities don't make their decisions a year in advance. Certainly not by fall of the year preceding the start dates of most students for graduate admissions, which is where most Indian applicants are coming from. So the challenge really is twofold in India. It's appointment availability and appointment and visa denial rates that were up substantially in the fall 2025 intake. So we'll still see what happens. The fourth major takeaway from the Fall Snapshot series, according to the IIE folks in their article that they've, their high-level analysis, the vast majority, 84% of institutions, rank international student recruitment as a priority. And they cite prioritizing international student outreach, recruitment due to the value of international student perspectives on campus, financial contributions of international students, and alignment with institutional strategy. So those pieces are important. Interestingly, financial support for outreach and recruitment is holding steady or increasing at 78% of institutions. So that's certainly a nugget of positivity that we can hold on to. And certainly at institutions that maybe have certainly managed up correctly from within the international offices to senior leadership on campus, when they are most leaderships at institutions, particularly those in probably more so those in red states, are aware that it's a tough year. Certainly I'm at an institution that does tend to lean more conservative in terms of the leadership. And we're certainly in a red state, and that certainly impacts the political will within the state. As a state institution, we've had state legislation passed in the last year's SB1 that limits or restricts our colleges in Ohio, public colleges in Ohio, from entering into new agreements with Chinese partner institutions, and there's concerns on export controls and intellectual property theft and all of that. So institutions have to do a higher level of due diligence to ensure that that isn't happening in order to register a new partnership in China. But that's just in Ohio. But certainly leadership at my institution is aware, hey, this is a tough climate to recruit in, and they're being supportive in as many ways possible as they can, certainly allowing us to pursue new opportunities to look at T&E as an important alternative. So I can say clearly that we're in that funding level holding steady or increasing for us, so that our commitment as an institution is certainly there. So that's the report coming out from IIE in terms of their analysis of the snapshot survey that they released. I do want to share what we're talking about here now, another perspective we see from Karen Fisher. Karen Fisher, who's a Chronicle of Higher Education reporter, long time. The international beat is hers, and that's where she regularly reports. In fact, she's created in the last 2 to 3 years a column newsletter, weekly newsletter that she puts out on Wednesdays as well, and that's called Latitude. And she has included an article that she had come out last week entitled "International Students Were Already Shunning U.S. Colleges Before Trump, New Data Shows." And that's looking at the Open Doors data, which chronicles the previous academic year, 2024-25. So, which includes basically students that enrolled in the fall of 25 and a few that enrolled in the spring. So, pre-inauguration for numbers. So, those numbers were already declining 7% last fall, and that's one of the big takeaways from the larger Open Doors report, that new international students dropped 7% last fall, and then more significantly this year, 17% this year, as we just talked about. So we are, and when I was mentioning earlier the full Open Doors report, it has a much larger number of institutions that reported. I thought it was 1,600 or so. It's actually more than 3,000 colleges are included in the Open Doors data that captures all international students, or doesn't capture all of them. It captures all that have responded in the 3,000 through all international students that reported, that showed the 7% decline last year in new internationals, and then the 17% of new internationals this year. So Karen, in her piece, also talks about the demographic cliff and how that we're facing domestically, particularly among state institutions in the Northeast and the Midwest. So we are at the precipice of that this year. We had an up year in our domestic enrollments this year that buoyed our decline and offset our decline in international students. So we had a net positive increase in total students at our institution. So this next year is really the test, and certainly the spring numbers are still, again, because we had Indian students as our largest single group on campus, and overall they still are, but our new students, they were down into second or third place, been replaced by China, oddly enough, for a state institution in Ohio. But we are certainly hoping that the situation in India improves, that we get back to business as usual. They figure out how to do these social media vetting questions that seem to be being done manually instead of automating pieces of that. So there's a lot of things that can happen and probably will happen once we have a trade deal with India. And this is something that you find yourself saying that and hearing yourself say it, and you go, what is happening in the world that our consulates and embassies abroad are slow rolling visas in certain countries that are the biggest sender to the United States in India, and for the last two intakes, not just this past fall, which is certainly Trump-led, but the previous fall, we saw significant drop-offs in Indian visa approvals, but even though there were more appointments available. So this is a real concern. Why is this administration slow rolling India? Is it really down to they're buying too much Russian oil, and the war in between Russia and Ukraine is still ongoing, and we want Modi to stop buying Russian oil and buy more U.S. oil? Is that part of the equation? Is it something that's simple? And we talk about this jokingly, but the reality is our recruitment efforts this year for international students with our new partner that we're working with in uni are focused on the practical realities on the ground. It's like, okay, if this is really the case in India, until things change, we don't want to push the pedal too quickly in India until we know the situation's changing related to visas. Because if we go too far on the application side and get all these students hyped up about wanting to come, and then they can't go anywhere else outside of India for visa appointments because of the change in regulations, what does that mean for this next fall, which is the real bread and butter of what we're trying to do, is build towards this next fall. Spring, we're still affected by visa appointment availability. So our focus really is becoming do we have trade deals? sadly enough. That's how we're starting to make decisions. And where are we seeing visa appointment availability? We're seeing some success in the Middle East now in terms of getting appointments where we're not getting them in India. We're seeing success in Vietnam. We're seeing success in Korea. We're seeing success in Colombia, other places where there are appointments available. So we are having to change our priorities really and kind of let up in certain markets and push further and harder in certain new markets. So you have to be flexible in this strange, bizarre world that we're operating in the second Trump administration, because the policies have forced us to change how we do things. And if it hasn't changed how you're doing things on your campus, you might want to have a look in the mirror, because it's not doing the same thing with new policy environment and expecting different results isn't going to get you anywhere. So part of the answer to the question on open doors data is, to be honest with you, what those numbers really tell us. The last year's numbers just don't really tell us much, other than we already knew we're on a downward trajectory. But the false snapshot survey says, hey, numbers are really down, and not maybe perhaps as severely as we thought they would. 12 to 7 or 17%, I think, is what was in the snapshot survey. But again, that's not all of institutions. There may be subsets that would say it was larger. There are going to be groups in that list that were down for 30, 40%, particularly those that were more heavily dependent on India as their primary source market. So those numbers really do tell us a story about the state of international education in the United States, and gives us some hope and potential directions for where we should be focusing our time and efforts, and certainly where we might want to reconsider emphasizing too much interest, at least in terms of the more traditional direct student recruitment models, and looking at more T&E options. And that's certainly something we're looking at in a couple of different countries that have previously been big senders to us, that we're looking at options for delivering some of our programs in country instead. So that's enough for the first question. Let's move on to question number 2, which is, are you pursuing T&E opportunities in China? All right, so T&E, transnational education. Hopefully this is not a concept that is new, but it's certainly one that in the United States has become increasingly important to be part of an overall recruitment strategy. And that's for a couple different reasons. Because we know that it's harder and harder to get students in to study here direct from China and from India. And those are the two largest senders. So it's worthy to consider opportunities to set up shop with a partner university, or certainly most all of us don't have the budgets to build our own campuses abroad, but to invest in opportunities to deliver our education remotely, in person through a partner, or in person through our own facilities. So that in China specifically, this has notoriously been a difficult country to unilaterally or bilaterally set up these kind of relations, because the Ministry of Higher Education in China has been, based on the kind of country it is, led by the Chinese Communist Party, notoriously difficult to get, and processes to get bilateral dual degree opportunities that involve primarily or exclusively in-country delivery of your programs to get them approved can take several months, if not longer. But that process is changing. And nothing in international education is ever static for too long. So a colleague of ours, Charles Sun, out of China, has his own LinkedIn newsletter. He sends out weekly and exclusively talks about T&E on the particular newsletter I've dropped the link to in the chat. And he references in his most recent newsletter, he's talking about the rankings game, how global university rankings shape T&E in China. Now, if you're not familiar, there are 4 major global rankings out there. The QS rankings, US News Best Global Universities, Times Higher Ed, and ARWU. And ARWU is also short for Academic Rankings of World Universities, or the Shanghai Rankings. That's obviously a China-based one. Those are the ones that most of the world uses, one or more of those, to determine realistic abilities to for partnerships, either partnerships between institutions, potential scholarship destinations, destinations for scholarship students from a country that has scholarships to U.S. or other countries, as well as potential T&E partnerships. So what Charles talks about is how China has learned, and for the last 15, 20 years has been gaming the system. And when you say gaming the system, that means they understand how these rankings systems work, and some are based on reputation, some are based on number of papers delivered each year, books published, recitations, patents, all these other things. And those are what they use to determine institutions' relative ranking on those lists. China purposefully sees what the criteria are to improve rankings for their institutions and directs those institutions to do X, Y, and Z to improve their rankings. And we know China has these massive decades-long strategic plans, as well as short-term individual, what we would call strategic plans in the U.S. for 4 or 5 years or more, 5-year plans, and to improve rankings of the number of Chinese institutions that are in QS top 200 or whatever it might be. So Charles has his finger on the pulse on that, and he talks in his past week's edition on how China is using those rankings not only to boost their own institutions' standing, and which they see as opening up a wider range of potential institutional partners around the world, but it also shares how rankings are used within China to determine eligibility for partnerships. So the question of, are you pursuing T&E opportunities in China? Certainly if you're in Texas, if you're in Florida, and to a lesser extent Ohio, and you're a public institution, you have very significant restrictions on you in terms of what you can and can't do. Some colleagues in Texas aren't able to travel to China themselves. They have to work through intermediaries, through agencies and other things. If they had existing partnerships, there may be restrictions on those, or those relationships may have had to been canceled. So there's some real issues in terms of what is possible and what is not in certain states, certain types of institutions working with China. If you don't have those restrictions, certainly these are things that you should be exploring. The dual degree opportunities, the 4+0 opportunities where your degree would be delivered entirely on a partner university's campus, or a 3+1 option where it may be a 4+0 or /3.1 option, 3+1 option that would require students, a certain percentage of students. And the good thing about these Chinese models is they typically are once this program is established, they are recruiting specifically for your program to be able to give a dual degree with you to students when they're taking their Gaokao. They're actually registering for these options when they're filling out their Gaokao applications in terms of where they want to be considered. They're recruiting these institutions with these partnerships, T&E opportunities, are recruiting specifically for cohorts to come in and start at those institutions as first-year students in this 4+0, 3+1 opportunity. So there is a real value in doing it that way because you're basically licensing your curriculum out to a partner institution to teach your classes. You have a revenue split for that money. The students are then at the end going to receive your degree as long as they're completing all the requirements that you have through your regional accrediting body for that degree, and then either fourth year come to you to finish, or on your campus, or complete the whole degree overseas. So that's the more traditional, most likely model for T&E in China right now in terms of bachelor's degree programs. But there may be pathway programs. I know we have several of them at the University of Akron that we've been working on in China for several years that traditionally bring us 10 to 30 students a year into our master's programs in polymer science. And all of those students, it's called a 3+2 program. They do their fourth year, the final year of their bachelor's degree program with us, which is the first, also that becomes the first year of their graduate master's program. And typically we can do that with countries that have fourth year of an engineering or science degree, bachelor's program that is research intensive or internship intensive, where they can come to us and get plugged into our research centers and institutes on campus or into our internship program, coming in to do that particular project for their finishing their bachelor's and then starting that graduate program. So that's part of what we're doing with TNE in China and have been doing for several years is 3-2, but we're looking at further options. But we have some restrictions in terms of what we can do institutionally now. But that's another story for another day. Final question of the day is, why does having a global perspective matter? And I alluded to this earlier with regard to what the newsletter that we publish weekly has a section called Global Roundup. And we cover the Global Roundup, and we've talked about this in many past editions of the Roundup here on Wednesdays. As I developed something during the pandemic when I had way too much free time, called Your 6 Ps to Strategic International Enrollment Management. And the first P in that, which are guiding principles for how to develop a strategic international enrollment plan for recruitment, but also enrollment and management and successful graduation of your international students and how that all fits together. Written a book, 2 book chapters, one on the 6 Ps that came out a couple of years ago, one that just came out this year on the enrollment management piece of that for international students and how it is a life cycle from recruitment to successful graduates, and how are you preparing these students for success all the way through, not just in the enrollment process, getting them on campus, but all the way through to graduation. So book chapters that cover those 6 Ps. But the first P is perspective. You got to have a local perspective, know what's going on campus, in your community, in your nation, but you also need to have a global perspective. And that is important to know what the global landscape is for international student recruitment and who you're competing against. When I started in the business in 1993, it was US, UK, Australia were really the big 3. Canada entered into the fray in the last 10, 15 years, but Australia, Canada, UK were the big, Australia, US, UK were the big 3 back in the 90s when I started. But the US had a third of the international student market in terms of global percentage of those that are studying outside their home country. There's about 1.5 million students, and there was well over 350, 400,000 international students in the United States back then. And obviously, we were the biggest player, and we still are the largest single destination for international students. But what's happened is the share of the international student pie has changed. We are now at 15%. So our percentage of 16%. Our percentage of the overall internationally mobile students has dropped, has been basically cut in half from about 33% to about 16% in 30 plus years. So the reason why that's happened is there are many more competitors out there, many more nations that have developed strategies to really pursue international students as a part of their overall international education strategy for their nations. Certain countries are doing it very well, have centralized governments and centralized policies and linkages between economy and education in terms of identifying programs that are needed that are not being filled by domestic populations, that we need another source, and international students are certainly the easy way to do that. Get them in the country, study in your country, learn the language, learn the culture, and then transition into work positions in fields that the country needs. So that's happening in a lot of countries, particularly in East Asia. Those aren't perfect systems, but that's happening. There are other countries outside the Big Four. They've seen developing English language programs, English taught degrees, to boost their share of the international student mobility pie. You've seen many European nations, France, Germany, Finland, even Italy, that have entered the fray and becoming increasingly destinations. Turkey, even Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Taiwan are all starting to become destinations, not just sending source countries for international students. So having a global perspective really means understanding that we don't operate internationally when we're recruiting in a vacuum. That we should be aware of how visa policies are changing in other countries. We think we're the only ones going through this really tough period. We don't need to look any further than Canada to realize just how bad some countries have gotten in terms of what Canada, which had been a previously one of the most open countries to international students, has now gone the exact opposite direction and are now one of the most restrictive, particularly for vocational and bachelor's degree students. There's very little chance now, unless they're cutting their cap in half for this next year. So there's really we have to be aware of this, because that potentially can be an opportunity for us, that students that might previously have been looking at Canada might want to look at the US now. Even though our environment's not exactly perfect, they might be going more to the UK, but then they're struggling with some of the funding issues at their institutions. Australia now has caps too, and very much managed caps, because they have a much smaller number of institutions. They can't be more than 50% international now. There were 3 or 4 universities in Australia that were already at that this past year, so they're going to be restricted. So being aware of what's happening in other countries is really important for us, so that when we are recruiting in certain countries, we should know who are the other key competitors for the students that we're looking at, that we're going to be meeting with. Are they going to be just looking at us and the UK, or us, Canada, US, UK, or maybe at their home country or a regional hub that they might be considering? These are the things we need to be aware of, so that we can anticipate some of the questions, know what countries' strengths and potential weaknesses are, and potentially design talking points or messaging around that can respond or emphasize your own country, not just your own institution, but your own country's benefits. And I know that might sound hard to realize sometimes. What are we really selling in the United States anymore? But that's part of the process we really need to be working towards with our communication with our intended students. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. Just a quick note, next week we're going to be live on location at AirC, the AirC conference in Atlanta, coming to you from the Marriott Marquis. So be on the lookout for a live next week from the conference in Atlanta right before that starts. So looking forward to chatting with you then. Cheers.